Hollywood, California, March 26, 1960. Frank Sinatra had once called rock and roll the most brutal, degenerate music ever created. Elvis Presley was the king of that degenerate music. Tonight, they would stand on the same stage for the first time. NBC Studio 4 was packed with 300 people holding their breath. Half of them Sinatra fans who thought Elvis was destroying American culture. Half of them Elvis fans who thought Sinatra was outdated. What happened in the next 12 minutes didn't just make television history, it healed a divided America. 1960 was a country at war with itself, not with bullets, but with beliefs. The greatest generation, people who'd survived the Depression and won World War II, looked at America's youth with confusion and fear. Their children were listening to music that sounded like chaos, dancing in ways that looked obscene, rejecting everything their parents had worked to build. Frank Sinatra represented everything the old guard valued. He was elegant, sophisticated, disciplined. His music was about romance and class. He wore tuxedos and sang standards with orchestras. He was safe. He was American tradition. Elvis Presley represented everything that terrified them. He was dangerous, sexual, unpredictable. His music was loud and primitive. He moved his hips in ways that made parents cover their children's eyes. He was revolution. He was the end of everything familiar. The two men had never met, but they'd been fighting a cultural war through their music for 4 years. And Sinatra had been clear about which side he was on. In 1957, Sinatra had told a reporter, "Rock and roll is the most brutal, ugly, degenerate, vicious form of expression it has been my displeasure to hear. It's sung, played, and written for the most part by cretinous goons. This rancid-smelling aphrodisiac I deplore." He'd been talking about Elvis. Everyone knew it. Elvis had never responded publicly. He just kept making music, kept breaking records, kept being himself. But people close to Elvis said those words had hurt. Sinatra was a legend. Elvis respected legends. And to be called a cretinous goon by someone you admired, that stung. But now, in March 1960, everything had changed. Elvis had just returned from 2 years of military service in Germany. He'd served honorably, asked for no special treatment, done his duty. He'd left America as a rebel and come back as something different, mature, disciplined, respectful. And Sinatra had noticed. The invitation nobody expected. In February 1960, Frank Sinatra made a phone call that shocked the entertainment industry. He called Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, and said, "I want Elvis on my show." Parker was suspicious. "Why, so you can make fun of him on national television?" "No," Sinatra said firmly, "because I was wrong about him. He served his country, he conducted himself with class, and I want to welcome him back to America. Properly. Frank, you called rock and roll degenerate. You called performers like Elvis goons. I know what I said. I said it when I was angry about how music was changing. I was wrong. Music evolves. Elvis didn't destroy music, he changed it. And change isn't the same as destruction. I want to make peace. I want to show America that we don't have to be divided." Parker discussed it with Elvis. Elvis's first reaction was caution. "He called me a goon, Colonel. Why would I go on his show?" "Because Frank Sinatra is admitting he was wrong," Parker said. "That takes guts. And because this could be good for you. Show America that you're not just a rebel. Show them you belong on the same stage as legends." Elvis thought about it for a week. Then he said yes. The announcement made headlines across America. Elvis Presley to appear on Frank Sinatra's Welcome Home special. Some people were excited. Others were outraged. Conservative viewers threatened to boycott. Elvis fans wondered if it was a trap. But both men were committed. They were going to stand on the same stage and prove that different didn't have to mean enemy. The rehearsal. 2 days before the show, Elvis arrived at NBC Studio 4 for rehearsals. Frank Sinatra was already there, running through arrangements with his orchestra. When Elvis walked in, the studio went silent. Everyone stopped to watch. This was the moment. The first time the two kings would come face to face. Sinatra saw Elvis and walked over. Elvis extended his hand. Sinatra took it, then pulled Elvis into a brief hug. "Welcome back, kid," Sinatra said. "Thanks for serving." "Thank you for having me, Mr. Sinatra," Elvis said respectfully. "Call me Frank. And listen, I owe you an apology. Things I said about rock and roll a few years ago, I was wrong. I was scared of change. I was wrong." Elvis looked surprised. "You don't have to apologize, sir." "Yes, I do. I called your music degenerate. That was disrespectful. Your music means something to millions of people. Who am I to call that worthless?" Elvis was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your music means something to me. I grew up listening to you. You're one of the reasons I wanted to be a singer." Sinatra smiled. "Then let's show America that different kinds of music can exist together, that we don't have to destroy each other to be great." They rehearsed for 3 hours. The plan was simple but powerful. Sinatra would sing Elvis's Love Me Tender in his style. Elvis would sing Sinatra's Witchcraft in his style. They'd show that great songs transcend genre, that respect transcends rivalry. During rehearsal, something unexpected happened. As Sinatra sang Love Me Tender, Elvis watched from the side of the stage with visible emotion. When Sinatra finished, Elvis said quietly, "That was beautiful, Frank. Really beautiful." "It's a beautiful song," Sinatra replied. "You wrote a classic, kid." When Elvis sang Witchcraft, Sinatra stood in the wings and smiled. Elvis wasn't trying to sound like Sinatra. He was making the song his own, warm, sincere, respectful of the original, but unmistakably Elvis. When Elvis finished, Sinatra walked over and said, "You've got real talent, Elvis. Not just rock and roll talent, real across-the-board talent. Don't let anyone tell you different." By the end of rehearsal, the crew was crying. This wasn't just two singers preparing for a TV show. This was reconciliation. This was two men representing two Americas finding common ground the night everything changed. March 26, 1960, the Frank Sinatra Timex show, Welcome Home Elvis. The studio audience of 300 was split down the middle. Half Sinatra fans in elegant dresses and suits, half Elvis fans in jeans and leather jackets. The energy was tense. Would this work, or would it be a disaster? The show opened with Sinatra performing several of his classics with his usual elegance. The audience was respectful but reserved. They were waiting for Elvis. Then Sinatra paused and addressed the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen, 2 years ago, a young man left America to serve his country in the Army. Tonight, he's back. And whether you like his music or not, I think we can all agree. He served with honor, and he deserves our respect. Please welcome home Elvis Presley." The audience erupted, half in excitement, half in polite applause. Elvis walked onto the stage in a sleek dark suit, no guitar, no hip movements, just a polite smile. He looked nervous. This was Frank Sinatra's stage, Sinatra's audience, Sinatra's world. Elvis and Frank shook hands. Then Frank said something into the microphone that nobody expected. "Elvis, before we sing, I want to say something publicly. A few years ago, I said some harsh things about rock and roll music. I was wrong. I was judging something I didn't understand. You've proven that rock and roll isn't about destroying music. It's about expanding it. I'm honored to share this stage with you tonight." The audience went silent. Did Frank Sinatra just apologize to Elvis Presley on national television? Elvis looked genuinely moved. "Thank you, Frank. That means more than you know. I grew up listening to your music. You're one of my heroes. Being here tonight is an honor." The tension in the room dissolved. Suddenly, this wasn't a confrontation. It was a conversation, the performance that united America. Frank Sinatra stepped to the microphone first. The orchestra began playing, but not one of Frank's songs. They were playing Love Me Tender, Elvis's biggest ballad. Frank's voice transformed the song. He sang it as a slow jazz waltz, rich and smooth, with an elegance that made the familiar melody sound brand new. It wasn't better than Elvis's version. It wasn't trying to be. It was just different. A master interpreter showing that great songs work in any style. The camera cut to Elvis watching from the side. His eyes were wet. Seeing Frank Sinatra, the voice, the chairman of the board, sing his song with such respect and artistry was overwhelming. When Frank finished, the audience gave him a standing ovation. Then Frank turned to Elvis and said, "Your turn, kid." Elvis walked to the microphone. The orchestra began Witchcraft, one of Sinatra's signature songs, sophisticated and cool. Elvis didn't try to sound like Sinatra. He couldn't have, even if he'd wanted to. But he sang it with warmth and sincerity, transforming the swinging standard into something more intimate. His voice was full of respect for the song and the man who'd made it famous. As Elvis sang, Frank watched with a smile. He nodded along to the music, clearly impressed. When Elvis finished, the audience exploded. Not just Elvis fans, everyone. Because what they'd just witnessed wasn't one style beating another. It was proof that different styles could coexist, could respect each other, could even enhance each other. Sinatra walked over to Elvis, put his hand on Elvis's shoulder, and said into the microphone, "You've got class, kid." Those 5 words, broadcast to millions of Americans watching at home, changed everything. Frank Sinatra, the voice of the establishment, had just validated Elvis Presley, the voice of youth rebellion. If they could respect each other, maybe America didn't have to be so divided. What happened after the cameras stopped? After the show ended, Frank and Elvis sat in Sinatra's dressing room, drinking coffee and talking for over an hour. The crew left them alone, sensing something important was happening. "You handled yourself well tonight," Frank said. "A lot of young performers would have tried to show me up, prove they were better. You didn't do that. You showed respect. That matters." "How could I not show respect?" Elvis said. "You're Frank Sinatra. You've been great longer than I've been alive. Don't sell yourself short, kid. You've done something I never did. You changed music. I interpreted music beautifully, but I never changed the direction of the art form. You did. That takes guts." Elvis was quiet. Then he said, "Do you really think I changed music? Or did I just make noise that got attention?" "You changed it," Frank said firmly. "And you know what? I'm glad you did. Music was getting stale, too safe, too predictable. You shook things up. That's good for art. I was just too old and stubborn to see it at first." They talked about everything: music, fame, the pressure of being a symbol, the loneliness of success. They discovered they had more in common than they'd thought. Both had grown up poor. Both had been criticized for their styles. Both felt the weight of representing something bigger than themselves. "You're going to have a long career," Frank said as Elvis was leaving. "But here's my advice. Don't let them turn you into a commodity. You're an artist. Stay an artist. Don't let the machine grind you down." Elvis took that advice to heart. In later years, he'd often cite that conversation with Sinatra as one of the most meaningful of his career. Have you ever changed your mind about someone after actually meeting them or talking to them? Someone you judged from a distance but then realized you were wrong about? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes the people we think are our opposites are more like us than we know. The impact on America. The Frank Sinatra Timex Show, Welcome Home. Elvis was watched by 41.5% of American households, one of the highest-rated TV specials of 1960. But the impact went far beyond ratings. Newspaper headlines the next day reflected the cultural significance. The king meets the chairman. Two generations find common ground. Sinatra and Presley prove music can unite. Conservative viewers who dismissed Elvis as a degenerate saw him conducting himself with class and humility. They saw Frank Sinatra, their Frank, the voice of their generation, treating Elvis with respect. If Frank could accept Elvis, maybe they could too. Young viewers who dismissed Sinatra as outdated saw him being gracious and open-minded. They saw Elvis, the voice of their rebellion, respecting tradition and learning from legends. If Elvis could respect Sinatra, maybe they could too. Music critics wrote that the show was proof that American music was evolving, not dying, that different styles could coexist, that each generation didn't have to destroy the previous one's art to create their own. One critic wrote, "Last night, on a television stage in Hollywood, America healed a little bit. We saw that the old guard and the new generation aren't enemies. They're just different voices in the same conversation. Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley showed us that respect is possible, that common ground exists, that we don't have to be at war with each other over music or anything else." What Sinatra said privately. In the weeks after the show, Frank Sinatra told his friends and colleagues that performing with Elvis had changed his perspective on rock and roll. Sammy Davis Jr., Sinatra's close friend, later recalled, "Frank called me the day after the Elvis show and said, 'Sam, I was wrong about rock and roll. It's not destruction, it's evolution. Elvis isn't destroying what we built, he's building on it. There's room for both of us.'" Dean Martin, another member of Sinatra's Rat Pack, said, "Frank respected guts and talent. Elvis had both. After they performed together, Frank talked about Elvis like he was a colleague, not an enemy." That's high praise from Frank. In a 1965 interview, Sinatra reflected on the show. "Performing with Elvis taught me something important. I'd been judging an entire generation of music based on my fear that my style was becoming irrelevant. But art isn't a competition where only one style can survive. There's room for swing and rock and roll. There's room for me and Elvis. I wish I'd learned that sooner." What Elvis said privately. Elvis talked about the Sinatra show for the rest of his life. It was one of his proudest moments, not because of the ratings or the publicity, but because he'd earned the respect of someone he admired. In a 1971 interview, Elvis said, "Singing with Frank Sinatra was more nerve-wracking than any concert I've ever done. I grew up listening to Frank. He was the standard of excellence. And here I was, this rock and roll kid, singing his songs on his show. I was terrified I'd embarrass myself. But Frank was so kind, so gracious. He apologized to me on national television for things he'd said about rock and roll. That took courage. It would have been easier for him to just pretend he'd never said those things. but he owned it. He admitted he was wrong. That's class. Elvis also said that Sinatra's advice, stay an artist, don't let the machine grind you down, was something he thought about often. Frank warned me that the industry would try to turn me into a product instead of an artist. He was right. I haven't always succeeded at staying true to the art, but Frank's words remind me what I should be aiming for. The friendship that grew. After the 1960 show, Frank and Elvis maintained a respectful friendship. They weren't close. Their lives were too different. Their circles didn't overlap much, but they stayed in touch. They occasionally sent each other records with notes, thought you'd appreciate this, or this reminded me of our conversation. In 1965, when Elvis was filming in Hollywood, he and Frank ran into each other at a restaurant. They sat together for 2 hours talking about music and life. Other diners watched in amazement. The two kings just having dinner like regular friends. In 1969, when Elvis was preparing for his comeback Vegas residency, he called Sinatra for advice. "Frank, you've been doing Vegas for years. Any tips?" "Just be yourself," Sinatra said. "Don't try to be me. Don't try to be anyone else. Vegas audiences respect authenticity. Give them Elvis and they'll love you." Elvis took that advice. His Vegas residency was a massive success. When Elvis died in 1977, Sinatra was asked for a comment. He said simply, "Elvis was a decent, generous, talented man. The world is lesser without him." The cultural legacy. The 1960 Sinatra-Elvis show is now considered a watershed moment in American cultural history. It's taught in music history courses as an example of how art can bridge divides. The footage is preserved in the Library of Congress as culturally significant. Clips are used in documentaries about the evolution of American music, about generational conflict, about the power of reconciliation. Music historians point to the show as the moment rock and roll was legitimized by the establishment. When Frank Sinatra welcomed Elvis Presley onto his stage with respect and humility, one historian wrote, he was acknowledging that rock and roll wasn't a passing fad. It was the future, and he was man enough to accept that. But the show's legacy goes beyond music. It's about what happens when we let go of prejudice and actually listen to each other. When we stop seeing differences as threats and start seeing them as opportunities for growth. Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley represented two different Americas. But for 12 minutes on a March night in 1960, those two Americas stood on the same stage and sang each other's songs. And for a moment, America was whole. What's one belief you held strongly that you later realized was wrong? Something you were sure about until you actually experienced the thing you'd been judging? Share in the comments. Sometimes growth means admitting we were wrong. March 26, 1960. A legend who'd called rock and roll degenerate stood on stage with the king of rock and roll. Instead of fighting, they sang each other's songs. Instead of competing, they respected each other. Instead of dividing America further, they showed a path toward unity. Frank Sinatra could have stayed stubborn. He could have refused to apologize, refused to acknowledge that he'd been wrong about rock and roll. He could have kept dismissing Elvis as a talentless goon, but he didn't. He admitted he was wrong. He invited Elvis onto his stage. He sang Elvis's song with respect, and in front of millions of Americans he said, "You've got class, kid." That took courage, more courage than it took to criticize from a distance. It's easy to judge people we don't know. It's hard to admit we were wrong. Elvis could have held a grudge. Sinatra had called his music degenerate, called him a goon. Elvis could have refused the invitation or used the show to prove Sinatra was outdated, but he didn't. He accepted the invitation with humility. He sang Sinatra's song with respect. He conducted himself with class. That took wisdom, more wisdom than it takes to fight back. It's easy to return insult with insult. It's hard to respond to criticism with grace. Together, they showed America something it desperately needed to see, that different generations, different styles, different voices don't have to be enemies. They can coexist. They can learn from each other. They can respect each other. That lesson is as relevant now as it was in 1960. We live in a divided time. Different generations don't understand each other. Different groups see each other as threats. Different voices talk past each other instead of to each other. But Frank and Elvis proved that bridges can be built, that apologies can be offered and accepted. That respect can replace rivalry. That common ground exists if we're willing to look for it. Two kings, one stage, 12 minutes that changed America. Maybe we all need to find our version of that stage, the place where we stand with someone different from us and sing each other's songs. The moment where we admit we were wrong and offer respect instead of rivalry, because that's how divided nations heal. not through force or victory, but through humility and grace, not by proving we're right, but by admitting we've been wrong, not by destroying those who are different, but by learning from them. Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley taught us that, and the lesson still stands. Subscribe to Elvis Presley Legacy Stories to discover more moments that prove music can unite what culture divides. Share this story with someone from a different generation, someone whose taste you don't always understand, someone who might benefit from hearing that differences don't have to mean division. And the next time you're tempted to dismiss something or someone because they're different from you, remember, Frank Sinatra thought rock and roll was degenerate. Then he met Elvis, and everything changed. Your Frank and Elvis moment is waiting. Will you take it?